This is Who's Who Speaks with Mike Ryan and Guy Dill.
Guy Dill's work is collected and exhibited all around the world. He's one of the acknowledged contemporary masters of large-scale abstract sculptural works. Guy has had over 50 one-man exhibitions in cities including Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, London and Brussels. His works feature in the permanent collections of many prominent museums, including the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And Guy, great to see you.
Nice to meet you, Mike. Welcome.
Tell us first of all about the Venice Mafia. We hear so much about this crowd. And the Mafia is a bit harsh, isn't it?
It's a funny label. And it was, it's now almost folklore. I don't know how many years it takes to make something folklore, but this was basically during the 70s. And this area had a lot of great empty warehouses. The rent was cheap. And as I mentioned before, artists, they need real estate. You can't produce without a place to do it. And they were plentiful. So after graduating art school, or some artists came from different areas of the United States and Europe and found these places to work in warehouses. So as it was, because there was no real other stimulus, the artists had an ongoing conversation, and that usually creates a particular kind of movement. And of course, the term came from outside of who we were. You get labeled from outside your system usually, but it was a wonderful collection of artists, and we had a lot of dialogue.
There's a quote here: "If I was struggling, I wasn't aware of it. The struggle might have been in the studio with issues of the work, but struggling artist, that wasn't me." So why not? Has success come easy for you?
Well, it wasn't really about success, Mike. It was more about the activity of making art. It always seemed a privilege to me. So if I could get myself in a position to be in the studio and working, it didn't require any luxuries. One thing about living on the West Coast, you're not going to die in the winter. You might get a little cold, but you'll be okay. And the struggle was always had to do with building the work, the dialogue of the work. Where am I going with it? What is the conflict? How am I dealing with a particular situation, whether it's a technique or an idea or a concept? Those are the struggles that I had. Sacrificing was not an issue with me. I got what I got to help make it possible for me to make work. If I could sell something on occasion in the very early days, it went right back into the work. It wasn't about lifestyle. Lifestyle was being able to work. So the struggle, is a different connotation. However, I was very fortunate early on in my career.
So how would you define success? Is it wealth, or is it what you create? How would you define it?
I think that's a personal, daily kind of issue. How was your day?
So how was your day? How was the last 20 years of days?
Some good, some bad. It's all about the work. The work takes me where I go, and sometimes I have good days with it, but the idea is just to be there every day and working it out. There's some really grumpy days and there's some really successful days. You come away with not what you were after, but something past that. I think that's pretty much a success.
You were described as your work meaningful monumentality.
I'm trying to remember who wrote that.
Stephen Nash.
Okay, and it really was in context with a conversation we had discussing the responsibility of work. I brought up the idea that I feel a great responsibility in the space that I consume. In other words, the works that go into a public situation, public or private, they go through a series of approvals here. Okay, and the basic question might be to the lay person is, how do you know when a work is done? Well, you know when a work is done when it tells you it's done, or you know enough about the work to pull back, or maybe it's at that point where you just know. Okay, and that's a hard thing to really explain. Meaningful monumentality. It's big because it is the right size for that particular context. You see, I believe that monumental works or exterior works, let's say against a corporate building, I'm not looking to enhance the building or enhance the landscape. I'm looking for a work that has its own integrity, its own discipline against the discipline of architecture, against the discipline of landscape architecture, hardscape, etc. Okay, so if these things can exist, can coexist, they create a kind of vibration. All right, the best work against the best building against the best landscape. That's the context that I deal within. So that meaningfulness has to do with maybe the right size is absolutely the wrong size, which makes it work. Okay, so I had a friend, an artist, and he always used to talk about things that were perfectly wrong. And he would make paintings too big, so he couldn't get them out of his studio. He'd make them too dark so that you couldn't see them. He'd make them too ugly so you couldn't bear to look at them. And it was really interesting because within that, he knew how to gauge his other work. He knows when it's wrong.
Imagine, go back 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's a long time, you're doing some great art, but is the passion the same?
It's probably a lot more. I think it's exponentially more because I know more about the work I'm doing. You know, I have a lot more dialogue with my work. You know, the idea of, think about Matisse's studio, the photographs you've seen of that great big couch or a chair in an artist's studio that's heavily used, right? There's an imprint of the artist in that chair or that couch. You sit in front of your work until your work starts talking back. You get enough of it going so that you do have a dialogue, and that's what artists mean by dialogue with their work. So if it's talking more, you know, if I'm able to hear more, if I'm able to perceive more, if I'm able to move fast. See, I can't move fast enough. The one thing about getting older is that you do know more. That experience helps, but you have this finite place. So I'm trying to work faster, but I can't ever catch up with myself because I'm running way ahead of myself. So it's really about there's a speed up in my thinking process, and I'm not catching up. So I'm trying to pick the high points of what I think are the best things to pursue, and that's what I'm after. So passion is an elusive kind of thing. I think passion is, for me, I mean, that's more of a sexual term than it is a working day term.